Okay, so today we're going to talk about gated ion channels, mostly the voltage gated, and then also some graded potentials. So to start with our gated ion channels, we have here our voltage gated, which differs basically just on like what voltage open them. So we have our sodium and our potassium, but first we're going to talk about our graded potentials. So this is just when there's a stimulus, it shows how, okay, for like if a ligand gated channel, for example, we have our stimulus, we know it's depolarized right here because this is where our, channel's at and where things are going to flow in, our charge. So it's going to depolarize the membrane. But as we move away from that site of depolarization, it's going to decrease. So we see that it slowly decreases until it restores back to its resting membrane potential. And this is just another good visual. And I like this visual because it shows how right here, like there's a lot of charge and intensity. And then down here, it gets a lot smaller just with, based on the length of how far it's traveled.
And with the length of how far it's traveled and everything, this is kind of based off of Wilfred Wall's cable theory with regards to neurons. So I wrote down here that it's kind of like treating neurons like a leaky electrical cables. And that's kind of how he figured out this theory. And so it just basically allows them to determine the distribution of voltage along the length of the cable over time. And that just basically takes into account like the leak channels and the resistance and all of that.
So then down here, this is just kind of another example of how it gets back to its at resting potential. So as it decays, as it goes along, it decays because of the leak channels. So it decays because of that those leak channels. And there's obviously, as you move down the membrane, you're going to encounter more and more leak channels, making it resume back to that resting membrane potential. So here is our voltage gated ion channels. And we have two different main types. We have our sodium and our potassium. And I have a little diagram over here, which is basically just this diagram, but I like to think that it looks better drawn out like this. So what happens is you have your inactivation gate here, and this is when the state is closed. The inactivation gate is it's not blocking the channel, but the channel is not open. So then we have an activation stimulus. So it gets activated and our sodium is allowed to come through. Then it gets inactivated where that kind of ball and chain just sits right in the channel. So nothing else can come through. So we call that inactivated. And to be able to go back to our closed state, it has to have repolarization. And right here I wrote that's where that gate pops out and the channel closes. So that gets back to normal. And down here we have our potassium, which is a little different. It doesn't have that inactivation gate. It just is either open or closed. So if we move down here, we have a good little diagram. And this just kind of shows our timeline for our sodium and our potassium gated channels. So we see here that our potassium starts to open when our sodium is in our inactivated state. And it's open for a lot longer than our sodium is. So this is a good picture comparing it to the resting membrane potential. So we see that our sodium is at positive charge and our sodium is coming into the cell right here. So because it's coming into the cell, our membrane potential is getting more positive because that positive charge is flowing in. So it flows a lot in at once, it reaches its peak, and then our potassium opens and our sodium channel closes. So our potassium is that positive charge flowing out, and that's what allows it to reach back to its resting membrane potential. And you can see here, because our potassium is open longer, then our stimulus dips even below the resting membrane potential. And that hyperpolarization is what allows our inactivation gate to go back to its closed state. So our potassium is slower to open, but also slower to close. So that hyperpolarizes the cell. And then down here is just a depiction of the absolute refractory period, which is with that inactivation gate. And it's that whole time that that ball and chain is kind of right in the gateway. And so I wrote up here, that's the minimum time between potentials when it cannot fire again. So it's that time when it's closed in and nothing is going to be able to flow through here. It's not even closed, it's just inactivated. And so that needs to be repolarized to open again, which is done by the K+ channels. And yeah.